While the Marvel universe continues to chug along and James Gunn attempts to resuscitate the DC universe into something worth watching, we will yet again go back to the world of graphic novels for our inspiration on book versus movie. It's really a very untapped realm as there are so many good horror comics out there, many without adaptations yet. The ones that have been adapted are very fun and interesting. Today is the mostly forgotten early 2000s movie that is based on the stunning and epic graphic novel from famed wizard and all-around cranky dude Alan Moore. Like many graphic novels, the journey to page and then screen was long and arduous. It's based on the very real killings in Whitechapel that were later attributed to Jack the Ripper. While both have a lot of truth to them, along with quite a bit of fantasy and conjecture, how close to the source material does the 2001 film get to? Line up your suspects as we find out what happened to this adaptation. Considering the source material From Hell was started in 1989, the movie took quite a bit to get going. This tracks considering the development, forgive me, hell some of Alan Moore's other works went through, like V for Vendetta and most famously Watchmen. Moore is also famously against adaptation of his works, as he's been personally disappointed by nearly every one of them. He even had his name removed from The Watchmen, and it's credited to artist Dave Gibbons in the Adapted From section. The rights to the movie passed through a few studios before finally settling in at 20th Century Fox and getting into production. The Hughes brothers were chosen as directors, and Johnny Depp, Heather Graham, Robbie Coltrane, and Ian Holm were signed on to star, with Terry Hayes and Rafael Iglesias hired as screenwriters. The Hughes brothers had made a name for themselves, first with directing a couple of music videos for Tupac, but then in the world of film made a splash with the 90s hit Menace to Society, followed quickly by Dead Presidents. After this movie, it would take a while, but they would come back with the moderate hit The Book of Eli in 2010. They had decent stock when they signed on to direct From Hell, and actually turned down the remake of Planet of the Apes to do so. They originally wanted Daniel Day-Lewis to play Aberline, but when he turned them down, they went through Sean Connery, Brad Pitt, and Jude Law before landing on Johnny Depp. Depp is no stranger to horror, with his first big role being in the original Nightmare on Elm Street, and a few other horror movies like Tusk, Secret Window, and The Ninth Gate thrown in. Robbie Coltrane has pretty much no horror to his name besides this, but in addition to his roles in the Pierce Brosnan Bond movies and of course Hagrid from Harry Potter, can I suggest you check out Mona Lisa and maybe Kroll? Graham got her start back in the late 80s and has shown up in things like Twin Peaks, Austin Powers, Boogie Nights, and other horror movies like Scream 2 and the wonderful Suitable Flesh from 2023. Finally, we have Ian Holm, who is more famous now for his role in The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings movies, but Ash in Alien and his role in The Fifth Element are my personal favorites. The movie was released on October 19, 2001, and made $75 million on its $35 million budget. It was number one in its first week at the box office, but was very middle of the pack for critics. From Hell the comic began development in the late 1980s when Alan Moore had finished watching a documentary on Jack the Ripper. He called his good friend and fellow legend Neil Gaiman, as you do, and asked for his help researching by finding case files of possible suspects. This led him to the theory by Stephen Knight, who proposed that the Ripper identity was created to cover up the birth of an illegitimate royal baby. This theory has been poked with holes and had contrary evidence thrown its way, but in a world of fake news and conspiracies about events being staged to cover up other events, it's not that crazy sounding. The story was released in multiple parts from 1989 to 1998. While it started in the magazine Taboo, the artist and author decided they wanted to move it to its own publishing in 1992. It finished its run in 1998 and was released into a massive 572-page tome that you can still get today with various additions, annotations, and addendums added from the author and other contributors. Moore is almost unmatched in his output with this, V for Vendetta, Watchmen, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and his comic book runs with Swamp Thing and Superman. While we're here, The Killing Joke is just flat-out required Batman reading. From Hell was critically praised and won several awards during its run and in re-release form. Both mediums follow a group of prostitutes and their friend Annie, who ended up marrying a rich man and having a child. Government officials and police separate the girl from her husband and child and have her lobotomized. The rest of the prostitutes begin to be killed off by the Whitechapel murderer, who would later be known as Jack the Ripper. The driver who takes the Ripper to and from his locations is forced to write a letter to the police. The letter is modeled after the real letter sent to authorities when the events took place, dubbed the From Hell letter. Inspector Frederick Aberline is brought into the official investigation, even though some of the police are complicit in covering up the murders. Aberline has little success in identifying the Ripper, but eventually it's revealed to be a physician of the Crown, William Gull. Gull has murdered all of the girls and has become unhinged with his belief that he is a god among men, even within his own secret society. He's put in prison for the rest of his life, and we see a vision of Mary, the final prostitute who he thought he killed, alive in Ireland, and the case of who Jack the Ripper is never gets solved. This is definitely one of those cases of a loose adaptation. The overall story is the same, but there are more things different between the two mediums than there are similarities. The first one is how the narrative is followed. The movie makes it all about Depp's detective, who is also a heroin addict and kind of a psychic. The drug addiction doesn't have a book alternative, but him being a psychic is taken from the psychic the book version of Depp's character runs into and tells him that Gull is the killer. Aberline also dies of an overdose at the end of the movie after keeping a secret about Mary being alive, even though he wants to be with her. There's also no relationship between Mary and Aberline that takes place over a huge chunk of the movie. Sticking with characters and motivations, the prostitutes in the book are actually trying to extort the crown, and that's when the queen turns Gull on them as punishment and a distraction from the royal baby being born. In fact, the entire message of the story and main character is different. While Aberline in the movie is kind of the main guy from the beginning, his character is an almost non-essential part of the comic. Gull is the main character, also known as Jack the Ripper, and we follow his story of going more and more mad as he kills all the women. He has an agenda that he needs to kill the prostitutes to assert the male dominance over females. He sees visions of London in the future, and eventually that he is the inspiration for works of fiction in the next century. While the movie follows Aberline in his journey to find Jack the Ripper, the source material tells you from the beginning who it is and what they're doing. Having that as a movie might have been hard to pull off and keep the audiences engaged. The endings of both men are different as well, with movie Gull receiving a lobotomy at the hands of his counsel, while book Gull is put in prison for the rest of his life while he transcends into godhood. There's a lot more political intrigue and even smaller details in the book that don't translate to the movie as well. Spanning 562 pages is pretty huge, while most screenplays for movies that are 2 hours run around 120 pages. The art style didn't quite transfer from page to screen either, unfortunately. While the directors tried their hardest, it just didn't work out as they'd hoped. Normally, it's a difficult decision to make between what holds up, the printed page or the silver screen, but this one's fairly easy. The movie From Hell I mentioned as almost a forgotten-to-time flick, and rewatching it, it's mostly flat. I wanted to like it so much more when I rented it from Video Unlimited over 20 years ago, and I wanted to like it more just 2 weeks ago when I gave it a rewatch for the review. Hell, editor Mike says it's the first movie he fell asleep to in the theater. The book is yet another masterwork by Moore. It's smart, overbearing, belligerent, and a genius take on a subject matter that deserves a crafted and catered look. The movie is an interesting piece of early 2000s horror with a fun cast and the potential to be good, while the book is a must-read for historians, horror fans, and salty necromancing wizard Moore fans alike. Do yourself a favor and read the comics, and then watch the movie as a supplementary spin on a hell of a tale.